don't know, that's funny.
All right, we are gonna go ahead and get started. We've got some folks joining us on Zoom, and I guess we do not have a way for folks to communicate directly with us via Zoom. So Zoom folks, if you're with us, you can always type in questions for Julie. Julie's also expressed, she works some with economists, and as economists like to do, they like to ask questions during the talk, and you're very comfortable with that approach. So if we want to make it conversational, if you have things that you'd like to say to Julie or ask of Julie as we go, I think she'd appreciate it. So just as by way of a quick introduction, Julie Cohen, who's joining us today, is an assistant professor of curriculum instruction and special ed at the University of Virginia's Curry School of Education. Her research focuses on the conceptualization and measurement of teaching quality, the ways in which accountability and teacher evaluation systems shape teaching practice, and the development of effective instructional practices in pre-service teacher education. Julie is currently co-principal investigator of a study funded by both the Spencer Foundation and National Science Foundation on teacher preparation, and I think her work is notable for the way in which she bridges various fields and brings together researchers from a variety of areas. She uses theory very nicely in her work and kind of brings that together with very rigorous research methods. So I'm excited to welcome her out. The other thing I'll say is that we have folks from a variety of institutions joining us today. So we have Rhonda from Harvard Graduate School of Education, and we have Jen Freeman from University of Connecticut. We were supposed to have some folks from the Center of Teaching and Learning, but I don't think they could make it with the weather. We also have Vincent Owen Elementary School representing us today in the back of the room. So please join me in welcoming Julie.
So thanks to Nate for inviting me, and thanks to all of you for coming out in the snowy weather to hear the talk. And I really just want to echo what Nate said. I like talks to feel like conversations. So please ask questions. 90 minutes is a really nice amount of time. So I want to kind of have back and forth as we go if things come up. And this is work that is done in partnership with my colleague at UVA, Vivian Wong. She's a statistician and a methodologist, and I had never done a randomized controlled trial before working with her, and I couldn't do it without her. And this work is funded by lots of people, but in particular by the Bankard Fund at UVA and the Jefferson Trust at UVA, as well as the Spencer Foundation and the National Academy of Education. And we're really grateful for the support. So to give you a sense of where I want to go with the talk, I want to talk at a high level about, that's the snowmobile? I'm like, there's a weird, yeah. That's okay, I can ignore it, I was a teacher. So I want to start by talking about the motivation for the work, why we might simulate, how it might be useful as both a practice space and a research platform. Talk a bit about how we're using simulations at UVA and our big picture research and development agenda. I then want to dive into two specific studies. The first focused on improving prospective teachers' classroom management skills, and then talk about more content-focused practice, in particular, giving feedback in a text-based discussion. Can you hear me now still? Okay. I'm going to focus on research questions and findings for the sake of time. I tend to find those to be the most exciting parts of talks. I'm not going to spend as much time on our analytic models and balance checks, things that are really, really important, but you know, just given the limited time, I haven't put in a lot of slides on those. I have extra slides. So if people have questions about methods, measures, just ask. I'm happy to go there. I'm going to talk about implications of the work and try to leave time for kind of Q&A and discussion at the end, even though I want it to feel conversational as we go. So for me, this work's really motivated by what I see as pretty consistent evidence of steep returns to experience in the classroom. So we see across studies, across contexts, the teachers are getting a lot better their first, second, third years in the classroom. And so for me, this begs this question of what are people learning during that time, and to what extent could we bring some of that learning into the pre-service space so that teachers are kind of readier to go their first day on the job. And to me, as a teacher educator, this feels like a kind of ethical imperative that we have to figure out how to do more with the limited time we have in pre-service preparation so that kids who are working with first and second year teachers know they have someone who has the skills that they need to support them. So that's the kind of big picture motivation in thinking about the work. It is a motivation around efficiency. So I'm taking the premise that we have a short amount of time in teacher preparation, not trying to make an argument for longer time, although I think it would be great, but really trying to think about how we can do more with less, given that I think that's the reality. And in the context of teacher shortages and low enrollment in teacher preparation programs, I don't think we're gonna move to a longer model. So given that this is the context in which we're working, what can we do in that context? So you might be asking yourself, and I get asked this question a lot, like, why would you simulate? Why wouldn't you just put people in real classrooms working with real kids more? And for me, there are a lot of answers to that question that have to do with both teacher learning and also our learning as a research field. So in terms of teacher learning, when we think about practice and teacher preparation, we typically think about these clinical placements, student teaching, other experiences. And in those placements, the mentor teacher is the central teacher educator. These are practicing K-12 teachers who are kind of tasked with supporting novice teacher learning. We have a kind of increasing body of evidence that suggests these mentor teachers are both really important. Working with a good mentor teacher pays dividends, but that mentor teachers are pretty variable. That there is this kind of distribution in terms of mentor teachers' own effectiveness, but also in their effectiveness at coaching novices. And these are the two things we know people really need to be able to improve as quickly as we need them to. So the simulations are an opportunity to move some of that practice into the university context, into methods courses, to give the teacher educators in programs the opportunity to supervise and support practice in ways that they otherwise couldn't. So I teach a general methods course at UVA, and there's a field experience associated with it. But there are 75 people in my class. I teach elementary and special ed candidates. So 75 in a given year. There's no way I can get into all their clinical placements and see all of them practicing. This provides a kind of window into their practice and an opportunity for me to kind of coach in ways that I couldn't in the field. It also gives us the chance to do things over again. So learning sciences make clear that this opportunity to repeat practice is hugely, hugely important, and prospective teachers very rarely get those opportunities, especially in elementary school classrooms. So sometimes a secondary math teacher might teach the same algebra lesson 4 times in a row, but that almost never happens in elementary school. So this opportunity to do things over again, I think, has a lot of potential utility. We also can standardize practice in ways that we can't in clinical placements. You're in a big city, so you might have more partners who are willing to kind of let prospective teachers in their classrooms. But at UVA, we're in a pretty geographically, diffuse area. There aren't tons of schools, tons of mentor teachers around. We take what we can get, quite frankly. And that's the case in many, many programs around the country. We can't say to our mentor teachers, we need all of our teacher candidates to practice leading a parent-teacher conference. That's just not something that we can do, but it's something that we know they're really anxious about and something they need chances to kind of feel more comfortable with. So the ability to kind of standardize and control the practice experiences, I think, is a huge benefit of simulation. We can also make much more kind of apples to apples comparisons across big populations of teachers, which you can't do in clinical placements. So the research also tells us observing people in classrooms, the way that you see and rate the quality of their teaching, it's affected by the kids in the classroom. It's affected by the content of instruction. It's affected by the grade level. And it's affected by the curriculum that they're using. So all of those things could influence the way we assess the quality of a pre-service teacher and their readiness to work with kids. When we work in simulations, we know everyone's doing the same thing. So that allows us to make different kinds of comparisons across big populations than we otherwise could. We can also track their development over time in ways that we couldn't in the field. As someone who's done classroom-based research for over a decade, I also feel very excited by how much data you get, how quickly, with kind of relatively low resource lift. Doing classroom-based work is really, really time intensive and really, really hard. It's really, really important, and I want to make clear from the outset, I'm not saying this should replace classroom-based experiences or classroom-based research. I just think it's a complement to those kinds of practice experiences and research efforts. We have mountains of data. Vivian and I have been doing this research for about 3 years now, and we have so much data that we're still trying to figure out how we capitalize on. But I think it's exciting to be able to kind of have that much data so quickly. We've been able to iterate on our interventions, and I think improve the way that we're preparing teachers as a result. So hopefully I've sold you on the idea that simulation can be useful. To give you a sense of what we're doing and how it works, we're using a platform called Immersion, which is the largest kind of provider of these simulation experiences in the country. They work with almost 100 programs all over the country to prepare thousands of teachers. And the way that the technology works is you can see it's a virtual classroom interface. Student avatars, you can have different kind of compositions of students, typically no more than 5 or 6. So it's a small group. And the student avatars move and talk in real time in ways that our candidates report, and we've studied this, it feels very real to them. It looks like a video game, but they say it feels real. And the important thing to note is you see the little video camera beneath the screen. So that streams video of the candidates into a remote lab. And that lab is controlled by a simulation specialist. This is a person, an actor, who was trained by Immersion, who then is employed by UVA in our case, who we work with to kind of deliver our scenarios in standardized ways. And they serve as a kind of a digital puppeteer. So they're wearing a headset and they have these very cool gloves, and they control the student avatars. And so that's why we call it mixed reality, because it's a virtual interface, but there is a real person who's controlling it. Yeah.
So who is voicing it?
The actor. One actor voices all of them. So there are limitations to that. The kids can't talk at the same time. So they all have different vocal profiles, and they use this voice distortion software. So the kids all sound different, but there are limitations. We try doing turn and talks, and I was with Rhonda yesterday at Harvard, and they're doing a lot of turn and talks. I find it hard to hear because of this issue. It's one person, and the turn and talk sounds very strange. So that's a kind of constraint of the technology. Other questions about the technology? Yeah.
Does Immersion treat this as a finished product, or do they?
No.
Can you envision a version 2.0 that will look different? And I don't think that's based on the actors, but I think the overall presentation. I think about, like, I'm even looking for a whiteboard room that UConn has and other institutions have. I imagine it would feel more immersive without being virtual.
So this is an upgraded version from the one we started with 3 years ago. So that one was much more cartoonish. The avatars looked less real. They're constantly developing this software to make it more realistic. I spend a lot of my time talking with the folks at Immersion about, like, kind of my Willy Wonka world, what would I have in there, and what kinds of features would be helpful in kind of giving information back to teacher educators. They're constantly trying to improve the product so that it's kind of less expensive and more user friendly. So that is something that they're working towards having a fuller classroom. So having 20 kids in a classroom, for example. But the limitations of one actor, I don't know how helpful it would be, to be honest. To see 20 kids but have one of them talking at a time, I'm not sure it would help.
Rather than have a roving mic, can you
repeat the question?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Yeah, I can do it. So over the last 3 years, we've worked really hard to try to build a kind of culture of simulation in our teacher prep program. So we have simulations now fully integrated in the program. Every candidate does baseline simulations as soon as they come. Within the first 2 weeks, they do a set of simulations. We have coaching sessions throughout, and I'm going to share some of those coaching findings with you today. And then we do exit simulations at the end of the program. And the idea with this is that ultimately we'd like to be able to use these data for program approval, for CAPE, for other kinds of purposes, because we can actually see how people get better during our program. In teacher preparation, almost never do we have baseline information about candidates. We almost never know what they can do in a particular context at the start of teacher preparation. So we're excited about this, to be able to actually track people's skills over time. We have a different kind of suite of simulations, and we keep adding to this suite of simulations. So we do content-focused simulations, classroom environment simulations. I'll share some of those results with you today. We also just added this past year a communication with parents scenario, and that was based on feedback from our candidates who said, we really want to practice this. We don't get to do it in student teaching. And so we have added those, and it's been fascinating. And then we have practice opportunities. Yeah, David. Yes. So David asked if we are writing the script that the actors work from, and we are. So Immersion has a set of scenarios that are available online for people who pay their kind of customer fee, but those scenarios didn't work for me, honestly. So I felt like they weren't, they're almost all classroom management focused. And I definitely, as someone who's studied the teaching of content, that felt like a big hole to me. But also the classroom management scenarios didn't resonate with my own experiences as a classroom teacher and my own kind of read of the literature. So we wrote our own scripts. And then we worked with our own actors to deliver those scripts in standardized ways that we feel comfortable with. Yeah, Marcus.
So if the script is a script and then we're trying to standardize why we need actors to do it in real time, is there a lot of like responding to like that, or?
So Marcus asked why we need actors if we have a script. Could you have a machine do it? And that is something we get asked all the time. My sense is, and I'm someone who knows, it's ironic because I know not that much about technology, but my sense is the technology is not there yet. It's like a decision tree model. So it's actually very behavioral in that like there are hits and misses, and that's what we write out. So we say there are things we want the actors to positively reinforce, like to engage in a different way with a student avatar, and misses, things we want them to negatively reinforce. And I'll get into the specifics of that with the different scenarios. My sense is that machines could learn to do that over time with enough data, but that it's maybe like 5 or 10 years away. So that we've talked to lots of tech companies because that's the dream, right? Is to be able to automate it. Actors are complicated people. And I've enjoyed working with our 2 actors, but in some ways I'd rather not. But it's gonna take time.
Well, it's also like, in theory, if it was automated, they could practice this, right? Like,
That's right.
without you there.
And they could do it, even more importantly to me, they could do it over and over and over again, because they could do it to the point where they feel mastery, and we're constrained by the fact that we have a schedule and actors and we have to book their time. And so that is a big limitation. So the ability to do over, I'd love people to be able to do the parent conference 20 times if they wanted to do it. And we can't do that now. But that is something that we're thinking about and trying to work towards. So this is kind of what we're doing at UVA. We're excited about it and we're learning as we go. So we're constantly trying to think creatively about how we can do more with the constraints of the technology, with the constraints of the time. Yeah. Yeah. So the question was about like role plays or standardized patient kinds of things where you have an actor just there with no virtual interface. And they're doing, so I think this is a space that teacher educators around the country are kind of looking into. At Vanderbilt, they have a whole lab in their med school with standardized students. And if you haven't read Liz Self's work on this, I encourage you to. She's a professor of practice at Vanderbilt, and her work's amazing. And it's all with standardized students, standardized parents. She's trying to do different things than we're doing. And I think that that has benefits too. What I really want to do is do a kind of randomized control trial where people are working with the standardized student and the virtual students and see the kind of pros and cons of that. UVA won't let me do that. So, so that's a kind of next step to think about. I think we don't know what the benefits are. Sort of anecdotally, we hear that our candidates, and we collect survey data from them, that they feel this is much more realistic than those kinds of experiences. That if there's an ability to suspend disbelief in a different way. I also think when you're preparing teachers to work with young children, there are limitations. It's I think, basically impossible to get young children to act in consistent ways. So most of the stuff Liz is doing at Vanderbilt is with adult avatars, with adult standardized parents or standardized students. Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to see where you're going. Do you mind just giving us, so you told us the story of what's going on at Cohen.
Mm-hmm.
Can you give us a lay of the land? So across the country,
Yep.
Is it the case that you see colleges of education hiring actors, building scenarios, and there's tens or hundreds of these things emerging simultaneously?
Yeah.
What is the broader landscape?
So Nate asked about the broader landscape of simulations in the country, and there are, I think, about 80 programs using immersion. Fewer programs doing what Vanderbilt is doing, like having a lab space dedicated to having standardized students or standardized parents there to work with candidates. That is considerably more expensive. Most of the sites that are using immersion, this technology, do not have their own actors like we do. So most of them kind of contract out with immersion and use immersion actors. They are mostly using it for practice. Very few places are using it for research. So most people are, it's hard for me to think of another place that's using it for research, which is why Vivian and I got really excited. This seemed like a kind of untapped opportunity. And we've talked to programs all over the country that are using the technology and want to be able to do research on it, but don't have the bandwidth. Most of the programs that are using it are regional large teacher preparation programs. So for example, Ole Miss in Mississippi uses this. They prepare 1,000 teachers a year, which kind of was breathtaking to me when I heard it. All of their candidates go through a whole set of scenarios, but they don't study it at all. They use retired principals as coaches, which I think is so cool. But we don't know anything about how that works. And so I've talked to them about, doing joint research. So I think that for me as a researcher, this is pretty exciting because there's so many opportunities and ways to think about this going. People are using the technology because there's kind of this face validity. Candidates like it. It feels like a useful practice. And people say anecdotally they get better, but it hasn't been systematically studied. Does that answer? Yeah. So before I dive into what we are actually learning, I want to make clear that in thinking about doing this research, I spent a lot of time reading historical literature about research on teacher education and pedagogies in teacher education. In particular, the micro-teaching research that was pretty common in the 70s and 80s, because I think at first blush, this feels like micro-teaching. And for those of you who are not familiar with it, micro-teaching involved candidates getting up and practicing the same things in a kind of computer lab over and over and over again until they achieved mastery. So the technology was slightly different, but it could feel kind of conceptually similar to what we're doing. And that work was really kind of widely critiqued for being atheoretical, for focusing a lot on what works, for positioning teaching as really technical and not professional work. So in kind of building up this line of research, I've tried to be very careful to not make the mistakes that I see as common in the micro-teaching research, to do this work in a really theoretical way, to think about building a theory of teacher learning with the work that capitalizes on everything that we've learned. I'm like something. It's this? Okay. That capitalizes on everything we've learned about teachers and teaching over the last 30 years, that respects and kind of positions the complexity of the work of teaching at the center, and that really thinks about providing differential access points for teachers, you know, at different stages in their learning trajectories. So it's not a question of what works, but it's how do things work for whom, when, and why. So those are the kinds of questions that we're trying to understand. And to do this, I'm not going to get into the specifics of this. I'm happy to talk more at the end if people want to. For every simulation we do, we've been building out these skill progressions. This is for our feedback scenario, and it's feedback in a text-based discussion. So at a low level, you can see here, like we would see teachers providing perfunctory feedback, saying things like, nice work, good job, try again. And moving towards responding directly to textual misunderstandings, like really engaging with the content, in this case, the text. And then moving towards descriptive feedback, naming what kids are doing well, signaling for them and their classmates, like what high quality disciplinary work looks like, and then pushing towards text-based warrants, which is, to me, at the heart of what we do in text-based discussions. We talk about different levels of these skills, and how at a low level, we're supporting kids' comprehension with a particular text, but what we want to move towards is more transferable, portable skills that help kids understand text more generally. Thank you. So we have built these out for every kind of scenario that we have. We give them to our coaches, we give them to the candidates, we give them to the teacher educators in the program. And the idea here is to really make the simulation a piece of a suite of learning experiences about these practices. So, yeah. Sure.
Does the placement along the arrow mean anything? Is there a reason why high quality that set low on?
No. So David was asking if like the boxes above or below the line signal anything, and they don't. We just ran out of space. The x-axis does, that's right. And this is a work in progress. We change these all the time. You know, it's just a tool to try to support teachers, coaches. We share these with our mentor teachers. Again, we're just trying to create a suite of materials and a language of practice that can help us talk across contexts and learning experiences. So the context for the work and the studies I'm going to share with you. At UVA, we have about 120 candidates a year in elementary, secondary, and special education. Our special education students almost all take classes with elementary. They're licensed K-12 in Virginia, but they mostly, they want to teach in younger grade levels. And sessions, as I said, in the simulator are integrated throughout the program. Another thing to note about UVA is we have a pretty robust and long-standing system of data collection about our candidates. We administer a ton of measures, including personality measures. We administer the NEO 5-factor, which is a kind of standard personality inventory, self-efficacy measures, grit scales. I think we're getting rid of them. But we have, you know, this whole suite, which we call the Curry participant pool. Bless you. So we know a lot about the candidates. We also have them submit videos in their clinical placements, and all those videos are scored using the classroom assessment scoring system, or the CLASS, which is an observation system developed by our dean, Bob Pianta. So this gives us the opportunity to connect simulation data to classroom data too, which is great. The candidates at UVA are, in terms of some demographic characteristics, pretty similar to prospective teachers around the country. Unfortunately, they're almost all white and predominantly female, which is pretty common in teacher prep programs around the country. What is distinct about our group is that almost 80% of them have mothers with college degrees or graduate degrees. So these are candidates who are coming from homes, you know, with a lot of education, and that's not necessarily representative of prospective teachers in the country. So there are ways that these findings may or may not generalize to other groups. We're in right now replicating in other sites, including at SMU, and we'll learn more about what this looks like in different contexts when we do that. So to dive into the study, the first is focused on coaching, in particular with classroom management, and then even more particular with redirection of off-task behavior. And this is work that Vivian and I did with two of our doc students at UVA, and Adita Krishnamachari and Rebecca Berlin. And I found out yesterday the paper was accepted in NEPA, so I feel excited. So the simulation scenario here is setting norms, and we set it up like it's the first day of school. You have to set norms. This is something we know teachers have to do, and again, they don't get to do in student teaching very much at all. Like a mentor teacher is not going to give a student teacher this very important job at the beginning of student teaching. And we've worked with our actors to provide 6 opportunities to redirect off-task behavior throughout the simulation. And in thinking about what high quality redirection looks like, again, we have these skill progressions that are theoretical. High quality redirection for us is based on responsive classroom, which is a model that's used all around Virginia in our partner schools. So we're trying to build kind of coherent links between our program and what they see in the field. In their classroom management courses, they spend a lot of time on responsive classroom, talking about what high quality management looks like in a responsive classroom. And at a high level, the important thing to know here is that we think of high quality redirection as succinct, specific, clear, in service of preserving student dignity and keeping kids in the class. It's about getting kids on task, engaged, so they can do the work that's happening in the classroom. And so we've designed all of our measures in service of that conceptualization. We focus on this. This is a lot of text, and I apologize. We focus on this particular skill because we know it's really hard. This is something new teachers really struggle with, and we have tons of evidence of that. We know that management is a primary contributor to burnout, particularly in the first and second years. Teachers say over and over again that their prep programs haven't prepared them to do this enough. We also know that there are important implications for students, that when teachers are able to redirect quickly and effectively, the kids get more opportunities to learn, they spend more time on learning tasks, and that's associated with a range of positive outcomes. When they aren't able to do that, they're much more likely to resort to punitive disciplinary practices, sending kids out of the room, sending kids to the principal, suspending them, and that this contributes to student disengagement. So this felt like a really good practice to kind of focus on in a simulated context. We thought it could pay dividends in terms of teacher and student outcomes. Our theory of change here is that all of our simulations are happening in practice-based methods courses. So when I think about the micro-teaching work, it was all kind of standalone practice. And so we were really mindful to have this be fully integrated. So they're all taking a classroom management course while they're doing these simulations. They do a bunch of activities before they do the simulation itself. They read the theory of responsive classroom. They do all sorts of activities in their class before they do the simulation. We then randomly assign them to different kinds of coaching with the theory that more coaching will help them improve more quickly. And then we observe their teaching skills, but also their perceptions of the student behavior and their perceptions of next steps for the off-task student. The goal of all this work is to get people better at teaching real kids in real classrooms. It's not to get them better at teaching in a simulator. We are in the middle of doing that analysis right now. So we have all their class videos. Those data take a long time to analyze, but stay tuned because we're excited to see the degree to which these kinds of findings transfer in real classrooms. This is a pretty standard randomized control trial where course sections serve as our randomization blocks, and candidates are randomly assigned. Our special ed candidates are in the elementary ed group. And our candidates are randomly assigned to one of 3 conditions. Our control business as usual condition is self-reflection. In between simulation sessions, those candidates get a protocol on a piece of paper that says, what do you think went well? What would you do differently next time? What are your goals for the next simulation session? For those of you who are not teacher educators, this is very, very common in teacher education. We work in a pretty resource constrained environment, and self-reflection is something that we do quite a lot of. My read of the literature is it hasn't been tested as much as we might hope that it would. So we were interested to see if the candidates who were self-reflecting would improve systematically. A third of the candidates were coached, and they were coached by doctoral students who had been longtime classroom teachers. Many of them had been coaches in former lives. And then a third of them received bug in the ear feedback during the simulation session. So they got in the moment real-time coaching with a little, like a walkie-talkie in their ear. This is something that's pretty common in the special education literature. And it was actually a suggestion. My colleague Bill Therian was like, you should try bug in the ear. And I was like, okay. So we did. And because this is not, you know, that expensive or hard to do, we could do it. We could just see how does it work in this context. Yeah, Lindsay. Uh-huh. Correct. That's right. The question was, is the coach there with the candidate? Sorry. Uh-huh. It's a good question, and I'll be curious to see your thoughts when I show you the results. So the bug in the ear technology is used differently in different contexts. Often it's the person's in the room. It's used in a lot of CMOs and charter management organizations kind of widely, and the coach is typically in the back of the room giving kind of in the moment feedback to a teacher. And for those of you who don't know the bug in the ear approach, it's not like they're telling the candidate what to say. They're just giving them like it's kind of like a nudge. So saying something like redirect Ethan now. And so the degree to which this generalizes to bug in the ear coaching in classrooms, I'm not making any claims of, I don't know. We were just trying to see, could it help more in this platform? And I'll spoil it, it didn't help that much more.
So the coaching was real?
Real time.
It was real time. So
Uh-huh.
just off to the side.
That's right.
Saying,
Yeah, in the back of the room. We have a lab space that's like not as big and beautiful as this, but a fairly big room. And the coach is sitting in the back. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're talking about this later, but I'm wondering about how the simulations were set up. Were they done within the methods class? Were they done at a separate time? How many students were present?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The question was, how are they scheduled? They're done at a separate time. Typically in the evenings or on Fridays. Our students don't have class on Friday. And they were done in a lab. They signed up like online. No other candidates are in the room because we were doing this as a randomized control trial. So we didn't want that kind of spillover. We didn't want the candidates to see each other. We've moved entirely to Zoom. So they do the sessions over Zoom and the coach is on Zoom with them. And we did that because our candidates asked for it. They said it was hard to come in. They didn't like coming in on Friday and they wanted to do it from home. And it's not hard to do, so we did. But that is how we have set it up. It's not, and then they have in-class practice experiences that are fishbowl or different kinds of pedagogies, but we're not researching those in the same way. The question was how long is the simulation, and it depends on the scenario. In this case, this whole cycle of doing it, coaching, doing it again is about 25 minutes. Yep. So they do all their baseline simulations. So we have baseline data to make sure when we randomize them, they look the same. That's without coaching. They just do all the scenarios, we code them, and that happens at the very start of the program. This happens, there's a coaching session this cycle for each one of our research scenarios. But to Marcus's question, what we want to do is get it to a place where they could do it over and over and over again. We just aren't there yet, but that is the goal.
So maybe you said this, but self-reflection just means they look at the video of
So that's a great question. The question was whether or not people self-reflect by looking at the video, and they do not. They just do it, and then they get a sheet, and they're asked, how did it go? What would you do differently? Which is not, I think, actually totally not the same thing as watching the video. There's a whole literature on teacher noticing and having different kinds of protocols to support self-reflection more productively. That's something we want to study. And our colleagues at Southern Methodist are really interested in that. And so as we replicate there in particular, that might be a place where we can do more, like having noticing be the comparison, which is not the same thing, I think, as self-reflection. Yep. Yep.
So everyone here did the simulation?
Everyone. Yep. Everyone did the simulation. What they were randomly assigned to were different coaching conditions. And to be totally clear, we're not testing if the simulation works. We're testing if coaching in the context of the simulation helps people improve more. So that's our research question. So to what extent, because people all the time are like, why don't you test, does simulation work? And I'm like, well, we could, but that's a different research question. And what we're actually testing is whether or not coaching and these different kinds of coaching impact candidates' observable skills. We have tons of rubrics that we've developed and trained people on and gotten people reliable on. So we're looking at whether or not the coaching has a causal effect on their skills and then a causal effect on their perception of the student. This is a student, the avatar's name is Ethan. So their perception of Ethan's behavior, the extent to which they see it as defiant, uncooperative, we use the standard child rating scale. And then their perceptions of next steps to address Ethan's behavior. So again, this is done in the context where we know teachers are resorting to really punitive disciplinary practices for kids. So we wanted to understand, can we try to mitigate that? Yeah.
So, and number one, by their skills, you mean as measured by that simulation. So we're not like looking at them later in a real.
We are, but I'm not going to share that because we don't know yet. But yes, we are. We're looking both their skills in the simulation, but also we have all their class scored videos, and they're slightly different measures. So I'm working with a psychometrician to try to figure out how to equate, because a classroom video it's much longer and different, but we do have their skills in classrooms too. So what did we find? I want to orient you to what's going on here. So the outcome here is an overall quality of redirection. And it's a rubric, and I have it, and I'm happy to share it. But it's aligned to the responsive classroom model of redirection. And we train people, and we do tons of kind of systematic double coding, and our raters are really reliable at using this scale. It's a 1 to 10 scale, and 1 is low, 10 is high. The black line, no, I'll start with the gray line. The gray line is our control group. That's our self-reflection group. And the black line is our coaching group. And that's the kind of more traditional coaching, not with bug in the ear. And then the dotted line is our bug in the ear group. And what we see here is at the start, this is baseline. Everyone's about the same, which is what you want in an RCT. So all the groups are kind of comparable in terms of their redirection, and they're all kind of low. So around the 4 on a 10-point scale. We'll follow the self-reflection group here over time. They improve slightly. We see some maturation effects, like they're getting better. These are the regression coefficients that are laid on top of the line. So they're improving. That's not a significant improvement, but they're improving slightly over time. The coaching group isn't improving. The coaching happens here between time 2 and time 3. And our theory of change suggests that there would be an improvement following the coaching. That's what we see. And it's a big improvement. The bug in the ear group, this is a complicated thing to interpret, but they're getting the bug in the ear support during time 2. So our theory would suggest that they should improve between time 1 and time 2, and that is what we see. That's where they get the coaching. That's right.
Parallel
Yeah,
That's reasonable.
That's-
They're getting coaching.
that's exactly right. So what we see is exactly what we would have hypothesized. Yep,
So you said these are coefficients or these means?
these are coefficients.
So what's the comparison group of the coefficient?
The comparison group is the reflection group. And I have the
That's the control group, right?
yes, that's right. And I have the table. I can share with you the
So
details.
that's just like the constant coming out? Just picking the reflection, right?
Yeah.
So that's the constant, and these are the differential effects.
That's right. They're the differential effects of the treatment as compared to the self-reflection group. We control for things that are off balance at baseline. We control for the actor. We have an actor fixed effect. We have a coach fixed effect. So it's not a simple model, but that's basically what we're doing. But then we see here, a lot of people in our group thought maybe there's going to be huge fade out after they're not getting bug in the ear support, but that's not what we see. That they continue to improve a little, that's not a significant improvement, but they improve a little. It doesn't drop off without the bug in the ear support, which is nice. But when you look at the end, the two coaching groups, they do about the same. We don't see a huge added benefit of bug in the ear support. And so from that, we stopped using bug in the ear. Because it's logistically hard. I'm not saying bug in the ear is not helpful. It just wasn't helpful in this particular context. And so we stopped using it. Yeah, Lindsay. The coaches were trained to use the same protocol. Yep. And so basically we see this is a almost 2 standard deviation difference between the two coached groups pooled together compared to the self-reflection group. Yeah.
So, I mean, one way to interpret this support, Ryan, you're saying is like the coaching is really helpful.
Yep. On this practice.
Right. Can you stop me from being really impressed that the control group of just like the class as normal
Mm-hmm.
is not, I mean, those are essentially the mean gains from
Uh-huh.
baseline till the end of the course, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And it's like nothing happened.
That's right. Well, I'll make you more depressed.
Okay.
So no, I can't promise that. Yeah. Uh-huh. That is a great question. And so they're not equal intervals, which is important. And so in the second study, I present it differently because that throws me every time. Between time 1 and time 2 is like 3 months. Between time 2 and time 3 is like 20 minutes. Yeah, because it's all this. And this is like 25 minutes. So it's not the same, which makes, I think that graph is actually kind of misleading. So I'll show you the other way I'm thinking about presenting it and you'll tell me what you think. But that is, you're exactly right. It's like not, those lines don't mean something temporally, the length of the line. Yeah. They get, so that is helpful too. They're getting kind of in the moment prompting, redirect now. They then get in-person coaching between time 2 and time 3 too. Both groups do. It's a directive coaching protocol, so it's not reflective. It's pretty, it's pretty, like people have told me it's very didactic, which I feel okay about because my goal is to get them better quicker. So it's very much like, here are 3 things I saw you do well. Here are 3 things that we need to work on. Let's look back at the skill progression. Let's work on those things. It's directive.
But it's not supported by like a video of the interaction.
Correct. There is no video because we're like, let's move it. But it's an empirical question whether or not the video would help. Yeah. They get the coach, the coaching group gets the coaching here. And the bug in the ear and coaching gets it there too, but we don't see them build on. Mm-hmm. Yep. No, sorry, that was confusing. The bug in the ear group got the feedback that yeah. This group got nothing here. Yep. Mm-hmm. We think of time 1 as the baseline because it's when no one gets anything. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Uh-huh. Totally. So the question is about fade out, like what happened. These are very proximal outcomes and we're very mindful of that. So that's why we have these exit simulations. And we're in the middle of those analyses too, to see if it, yeah, that's when we would see, does it sustain itself in simulations? And then we can look at their class scores to see, does it transfer to other contexts? Okay, so I'm gonna tell you more depressing things, I'm sorry. But I think they're hopeful if you're excited about coaching, which I am. So these are on perceptions of students in the same scenario. And here our y-axis is the Connors, which is like a valid, reliable, very commonly used child rating scale. Higher scores on the Connors means that you think the behavior is more problematic. And here we see the 2 coaching groups. We can think of them together for the purposes of this because they perform not meaningfully differently from each other. Over time, the candidates who are coached, they see the behavior as consistent. They don't see it as more problematic or less problematic. It's consistent. The candidates who self-reflect see the behavior as significantly more problematic over the course of the study. We then look at endorsements of different kinds of next steps. For Ethan, he's the disruptive student in this scenario. Again, these are our coaching groups. They're not different from each other. They're kind of consistent in their kinds of endorsements of how to address Ethan's behavior. The candidates who self-reflect are increasingly likely over time to endorse punitive approaches to Ethan's behavior. To be clear, what Ethan's behavior is talking about his rock club. Rock club, he's in a rock club, he collects rocks. And he's talking about those rocks. This is like behavior every single person who's been a teacher has seen so many times and is, in my candid opinion, not a particularly big deal. He's just doing, he's loud. Like if you were a teacher, you would say something because it's keeping everyone else from doing the thing they're supposed to be doing. But this is not behavior I would ever think about suspending a kid for, ever. And without coaching over time, that's what the candidates are saying. Ethan needs a behavior plan. We need to think about suspending him. We need to refer him to special ed services. I don't want to frame that as a punitive thing, but the way they talk about it, it feels punitive. So sorry, Marcus, that's depressing, but it is what it is.
It would be handy on these to know the standard deviation on the measure.
Yeah.
Is that vague?
On which measure? Both, right. Yeah. I'm not sure off the top of my head. I have the table and I can look. These are significant effects. They're not as big as these, but I'm not sure off the top of my head what the effect size is. Yeah. So they're talking about the responsive class. We have that skill progression. I showed you the one for feedback, but we have one for redirection. And they talk about like strategies. What I see, what our candidates do is they ignore it. They just ignore the behavior. That's the most common. Or they say stop, stop, stop. And so the coach will say like, look at the skill progression. When we don't make clear what the child's doing, that we want them to stop, they may not know either. So they'll say, here are 3 things you could say, let's try it. So to Lindsay's question, it's pretty directive, but it's in reference to that skill progression and in reference to their coursework. around responsive classroom. Thank you. Other questions? I want to share with you this study too. I'll have to do less kind of like explaining because it's like the same setup. So this is a working paper. It's earlier stage. But I get asked the question a lot when I have shared the classroom management study. People are like, would this wouldn't work with content focused practice. So I want to share this with you to show that I think it can, but it looks different. And with good reason. So this is a paper I'm working on with my doc student, Emily Wiseman. And we're looking at coaching, the same kinds of coaching in the context of facilitating text-based discussions with a focus on feedback. Discussions are complicated. So that's our slice. Our goal is to provide high quality feedback with a focus on making text-based inferences and text-based arguments. The candidates are working with a 6th grade text, and it's called A Dangerous Game. You don't need to know particularly much about it, but a little bit will be helpful when I show you some quotes. The premise of the text is there's this student intern, her name is Lisa. She's applying for this job at this mysterious tech company called One Thing, and it's run by this like genius type figure named Pismo. And the text is supporting inferences throughout that Lisa is not who she says she is, that she's a corporate spy, that she's working for another company trying to get like high-tech classified information from Pismo. It's like a thriller kind of text, like there's a lie detector scene. It's pretty clear you can make inferences from the text that she is not an intern, but it is, you would have to make that inference, it doesn't say it. So we had all of the candidates complete this pretty extensive activity before the simulation where they had to respond to the questions they were asking students. So we said, who do you think Lisa is? What evidence do you have to support that? What would you do to help students make inferences about the text? What kinds of feedback might you provide if kids don't understand the text? So we're really trying to get into their reasoning about the text and their reasoning about the practice before they do the simulation. We focus on feedback because, again, like redirection, it's something the literature is pretty clear is helpful for kids. That we know that providing high quality feedback, what John Hattie and colleagues call feed forward, is hugely helpful for kids. So to be able to name what kids are doing well, to be really specific in identifying the features of high quality disciplinary work, to say things like, you did a nice job using textual evidence to support your claim. Different inferences are more or less justifiable based on the text. That when teachers say things like this over time, we have evidence that it really helps kids. But we also know that's mostly what's not happening. That most teachers instead are engaging in kind of more evaluative and perfunctory feedback, saying things like, nice work, try again, good job. Again, this is the same approach that we used in the last study. It's an RCT in the context of a general methods course where course sections serve as our randomization blocks. Here, we learned from the bug in the ear that we didn't see a lot of benefits. So it's just 2 groups, self-reflection, coaching, and the coaching is after the first simulation session. We're working with a slightly different theory of change here. In particular, what I was interested in doing with this study was understanding candidate characteristics and heterogeneity of treatment effects. So I wanted to know more about like what we could learn about candidates that would inform the ways they responded to coaching. So our questions are, to what extent does coaching improve feedback? That's much more similar to the last study. But then this much more descriptive question, we're not powered to do a kind of like heterogeneous treatment effects study, but to look descriptively at the characteristics of candidates who demonstrate differential responses to the coaching and or self-reflection to see like, what can we learn about people who get much better with self-reflection, for example, or who get much better with coaching or less improvement with coaching. So that was part of what I wanted to explore in the paper. And so to your question about the last graph, this was my solution for the moment. So here's what we found in terms of coaching effects on feedback. Here we have baseline. The light blue is the self-reflection group. Darker blue is coaching. So They look about the same. Again, that's what you want. And, you know, comparably low, like 4 on a 10-point scale. It's again, there's a rubric, a coding procedure. This is overall feedback quality. At time 1, this is before anyone's gotten coaching. We did away with the bug in the ear, so it's less confusing to interpret what's happening at time 1. And they're almost exactly the same. We see maturation effects. So again, there's like a 2 to 3 month lag between these 2 time points. And so people are getting better. That's good. That's a happy story. Then we get coaching here, half the group. The group who doesn't get coaching stays about the same. Group who gets coaching improves. This is like a 1.3 standard deviation effect size. So again, statistically significant and I think promising because this is, I think, a more complex practice to coach people on. Nate.
I want to understand the logic of the people in the self-reflection. So I understand that between baseline and time 1, we would likely see them this maturation effect. I'm trying to figure out what it would look like to go into this thing, try stuff out, see if it's kind of like get this real-time feedback from students about whether it's working or not. Do some self-reflection. Are they doing the same thing the second time they do it? And if so, that seems kind of. I'm having trouble putting myself into it and saying like, okay, I did this. It didn't work quite well, so now I want to try to do it again and tweak what I did or try a radically new approach. The fact that on balance it looks very similar. I mean, there's a slight difference. What, like, I guess qualitatively, what do you see them doing differently in time 2?
And I'm going to get to that a little because the next slides are more qualitative. So I will talk about it, but it varies enormously. And we see, so I'll jump ahead. That's basically what we're trying to do in the paper is to look at distributions and try to understand what's happening for different people because it's not the same. Those are mean effects, right? So there's like heterogeneity that underlies those mean effects. So this is the distribution by treatment status. The coaching group is blue, the reflection group, and I realize I should label it the same thing every time, but that's the group that is not getting coaching in white, and it's a frequency plot, and then the x-axis is the difference in overall score from baseline to the end of the study. So 0 means they didn't change at all. 4 means they changed a lot. 4 points on a 10-point scale. -4 means they decrease a lot. Yeah.
So like before, there's only a brief period of time between 2 and 3.
That's right.
Do they know their score in 2?
No.
So that's why they might not change their behavior, right? Because I don't know if it's good or bad. I just know.
That's
right?
Sorry, I don't want to cut you off.
No, sorry.
So Marcus is saying, do they know their score? And like, this is like what I want to study next is if I can't give them their score because it's like, takes time to score them. But we've thought about if we could give them their videos from baseline with their scores, could that be a treatment? I'm very interested in the effects of giving people performance data. That tends to not be a thing we like to do in teacher education. Generally, I think we have evidence in service that it could be helpful in teacher evaluation context, but people don't like to do it. But I would like to study it. So that is something we don't know that I would like to know. Like if we gave people their scores, could they leverage improvement? What we have learned from this sample is in some cases, yes. I think in some cases, no.
Is there a reason other than like practical time that this period 2 and 3 have to be condensed?
It's like logistical, mostly because we want to see it's an immediate effect, and policy audiences always, that's the biggest pushback, right? It's so proximal, it's so immediate, and that's why we're looking at these exit simulations to see fade out over time. Like, does it sustain itself? But we want to give people also, I think there's a self-efficacy return to getting coaching and just getting to try it right again. And that's what they say they like, is to do it right away.
Intervention is really psych.
Yes, that's right.
Like if you really think of, like you could go back and really present this as pre-post, post-game, everything that's happening.
like that middle set of bars, you could drop that.
That's right.
It would tell a similar story, except the maturation.
That's right.
Of the intervention.
That's right. I think the maturation thing is, it's like nice because I also get depressed sometimes. Like, are people getting better? They're learning something, so that's good. But you're right. It's like time, the end is really what we are looking at, time 2. Yeah.
To me, this is a really cool replication of kind of what we know in general about coaching, right?
Mm-hmm.
Training by itself, teaching by itself doesn't work.
Yeah.
You need coaching in order to
Yeah.
real change. And we've now done this with the simulated environment. To me, the real value added is that it's like,
Yeah.
I can do this in 20 minutes for somebody.
Uh-huh.
Because in real life, I got to go back tomorrow or next week for you to be able to do it again. So to me, that's the value added of the simulation here is the ability to do it in 20 minutes, right? Is there
No, that's right. But I think this question of fade out is something I'm very worried about. So it's only nice if it sustains. It's not that nice if it doesn't. Like if they get much better and then they forget, like who cares kind of. But so that's why we added in the exit simulations, why we're analyzing the other kinds of data to understand how these things sustain themselves. We've done purposive interviews and people say like, those things the coach told me are so helpful. I use them all the time in my classroom, but that's anecdotal. So we want to look systematically, like, do we actually see that? Yeah.
Right. I mean, I see it as, I mean, you know this, right? But like, from my perspective, looking at this, like, these papers are kind of interesting as showing like new things we can do, and like there's an immediate impact, and like something seems to happen when they're doing it.
Yeah.
But then from the what are we doing as far as does this have a larger impact side, like stop me from interpreting this as I'm going to give one group the answer, and they're going to and they're better at giving the answer right in the immediate time after I gave it to them.
Mostly I've been presenting this at policy conferences, and that is literally what every single person says. So I have.
It's like it's promising, right?
So
there's a clear next part.
Yes, I agree completely. And I think that's totally fair. And so that's why, I mean, to me, this is all empirical work. This isn't like I have priors, but I want to actually see like, do they hold up? So I agree with you completely. I see it as promising with really important next steps. And people are like, let's scale this up. And we don't know enough yet to do that. So this is promising in service of more work. So Nate's question was like, what is happening for the people who are self-reflecting? Why are they doing the exact same thing? And so we wanted to get into this qualitatively. So we did a purposive stratified subset of candidates, like outliers, people who improved the most in both groups, people who improved the least in both groups. We gave all their data to a researcher who was blind to what group they were in, and then we unblinded them when we showed them if they got a coaching session or not, because they analyzed the coaching session transcript. But we wanted them to try to analyze the data first, blind to the condition. So they looked at the transcripts, the videos of their actual sessions in the simulator and their pre-simulation materials. So as I said, we asked them to answer questions about the text, think about what kinds of feedback they would provide, how they would respond to students. So in the paper, and I'm happy to share it, it's a working paper, so I'd love people's thoughts on it. We have 4 cases, people who improved a lot in the coaching group, people who improved a lot in the self-reflection group, people who didn't in each of those groups. I'm just gonna share with you the people who improved because I was feeling sad, like Marcus, like let's end with a happy story. So this is someone, Liz, improved a lot. She was in the coaching group. On the pre-simulation survey, they asked who Lisa, the student intern, was, and she said, I don't really know who she is. She, in fact, said, I'm really excited to talk with the students about it. So she wasn't really understanding the text. And then when we asked how she would support students in making text-based differences, she said, I would want to make sure the students are caught up with the reading. So that's not really addressing the question, and this was not that unusual. We had many candidates who seemed to struggle with understanding this text. So this is the kind of thing we talk a lot about in math teacher learning and less in language arts, but we saw like struggles with kind of common content knowledge among our candidates. and to struggle with what I think of as pedagogical content knowledge, being able to kind of anticipate what kids would struggle with and how to support them in that. Throughout the first session, Liz did a lot of perfunctory feedback. She said things like, good job, good thinking, nice work, every time a student said something, no matter what they said, whether or not it was supported by the text. So the coaching session, the coach digs into the text. She was like, let's talk about Lisa, who is she? And helps Liz develop an understanding of the text, and then gives her strategies. It's a short coaching session, so they don't go as deep as we might hope, but strategies for kind of probing students' thinking and foregrounding this idea of the text. Like, it's not about just good thinking in general. It's about using the text to make an argument. That's the skill we're developing. In the second session, we see Liz using these strategies, saying things like, you think Lisa's excited, which is not an inference that you could support with the text. And she said, where in the text does it say she's excited? So we see her actually moving up on that kind of skill progression, doing more probing. It's not at the highest level. This isn't descriptive feedback, but it's an improvement. And we see that the quality of our feedback improves pretty dramatically, 4.5 points on a 10-point scale. She started low. She was at like a 1 or a 2 in the first session. So she gets to the middle of the 10-point scale, which is a almost 4 standard deviation increase. So she's an outlier. We sampled that way. But we see that the coaching is hugely important for her and helps her get much, much better. But then I want to present this case of Victoria, who is in the reflection group. And this is a lot of text. I'll read it to you. But she also improved a lot. And on her pre-simulation survey, she says, Lisa most likely feels nervous and probably anxious when Pismo brings up her lie detector results. I think this because the text says her heart was pounding so loudly in her chest, her heart would not be pounding as loudly if she were calm. So this is totally different kind of quality of response than Liz's, who said, I don't know who Lisa is. She clearly understands the text, and she's using text evidence to support her reasoning, which is what we want them to do with the kids. When we ask what she would do to support kids using feedback, she said, I plan to utilize feedback loops to further their thinking, to prompt thought processes, to ensure they're understanding the text. Also, I need to ensure that I'm modeling my own thinking with feedback that will help my students deepen their understanding and ability to critically analyze and make inferences with the text. Again, these simulations are happening in courses where they're learning about feedback. This is stuff that has been covered in the courses. And she has clearly kind of taken it up and understands the text and has this kind of pedagogical content knowledge about how to use this language of feedback loops as something we talk a lot about, and she's using that here. So totally different kind of profile in terms of content knowledge and pedagogical content knowledge than Liz. In the first session, she's doing pretty well. She is at the 5, so she starts where Liz ends. And she says, Ethan, there's our friend Ethan again, the student avatar. She says, Ethan, I like how you tried to put yourself in Lisa's shoes, that you went back to the lie detector results to support your answer. This is descriptive feedback. This is what Hattie calls feed forward. She is naming what he's doing that is useful and making that visible for the whole class. In her self-reflection notes to Nate's question, like, what are they doing in the self-reflection? She is self-reflecting. She's really going there. And she said, I think I did an okay job at listening carefully to their answers, telling them specifically what I liked about them, which is what we see her doing. She said, I think I could do it more often. And then in the second session, we see her do it 5 times as opposed to twice. So she self-reflected and leveraged improvement. And we see her improve 3 points from a 5 to an 8. She ended up one of the highest in any condition, and also a huge effect there. So all that to say, I think different candidates need different things, and that people use self-reflection differently. People might use noticing protocols differently based on what kind of schema and resources they're coming to this experience with. So in terms of implications, we see coaching can support content-focused practice. I'm really interested in trying to move beyond these main effects to try to understand heterogeneity. I think people like Liz and Victoria might need different kinds of supports. And in teacher preparation, we don't think about the work that way. We typically do a kind of one-size-fits-all model, and I think that's a problem, particularly given the limited amount of time we have. I think this is a platform that lets us kind of engage with those differences much more quickly and I think more efficiently, so we can provide more kinds of targeted resources and different kinds of resources based on people's observed needs. Someone like Liz might need a really kind of intensive support about making text-based inferences. We wouldn't know that unless we collect systematic data about that. So that's a huge part of this effort in my mind, is thinking about measures and ways to systematize data collection so we can really understand where people are and what they need. So again, just at a high level, I'm like, I have left 10 minutes for questions, which I feel happy about. At a high level, like to me, this is the platform has limitations, but I think it also has huge affordances in terms of letting us ask and answer different kinds of questions. We can hold things constant, collect data quickly, and rapidly prototype on our interventions. So like we saw a bug in the ear wasn't that helpful in this particular context, so we stopped using it. We get data all the time. We're constantly analyzing our data to try to understand more how to do this work better and more systematically and in more strategic ways. I think there's a lot more we can do about understanding candidates' beliefs too. I think the management study for me was depressing and shocking a little bit, that like over time they started to see this behavior that was not particularly problematic. Who doesn't like rocks, you know? But like that Hannah doesn't like rocks. But you know, that this child talking about a rock club, that they started to see this over time as warranting some kind of disciplinary referral, seems to me like that's pretty alarming. And that's something that I think as a field, we really need to think carefully about what we can do in this pre-service period to mitigate those very negative and I think problematic beliefs about kids. I think these simulations have huge potential as diagnostic spaces. Vivian Wong, my colleague, is really interested in natural language processing. We have tons of data, of language data. It's all time-stamped, and it's the same because we've standardized the scenario. So she has a joint appointment in our data sciences school, and we're working with data scientists to think about how to process those data. Again, we're trying to do things quickly, and I think using text as data is exciting. And then finally, I really, as a teacher educator, want to figure out how we can differentiate better. We tell our teachers to do it with their students all the time, and we do not do it. And I really feel like as a field, we have to come together to figure out how to do this better. And I think that only as a field are we going to be able to figure it out, because UVA is a particular place with particular candidates in particular contexts. And I feel like the more that we can do this work together and think together about how to do this, the better off we're going to be able to serve teachers who can better serve kids so that they're kind of ready to go when they start. So, thank you. It's so good. Yeah, Rhonda.
I have a question about the baseline. What kind of preparation do the teachers get?
So Rhonda asked about baseline and what preparation they get. So for like the feedback scenario, they get the text, they get the questions. For the management scenario, it's the first day of school, you have to set classroom norms. They're short, and we have packets of stuff that I'm happy to share. And then with the parent-teacher conference, they get considerable background information about the student and the parent. It's a father in the conference. So they get considerable information about that, but they haven't done any coursework. It's really a baseline. It's just like, what can you do when you get to UVA?
I'm just trying to figure out like the time, like welcome, like your admission or to arrive on campus orientation.
I do. Yeah, I do a demo at their orientation. So it really is like, here we go. Let's do it. They love it. I think they feel like this is what I came here for, like is to actually do they want feedback right away. And so we've tried to, we came up with tip sheets. We're trying to play around with like what we can give them that won't mess up the study, but will help them get better, because we want them to get better. That's the goal. So, but they want personalized feedback. And this question here about noticing, a bunch of them this year for the first time asked for their videos, which I thought was so great. But then we have to figure out how to keep track of it and like control for it. It's like there are research issues and then things about like improving their practice. So we're still figuring that out.
My doctor did a chemical study looking at video self-analysis.
Mhm.
They got their videos and there was no coaching involved, but they had a protocol where they would look at collecting some of their own data and setting a goal, and then they would go back in and do it again. Single subject, a little bit of really cool, promising practice.
Yeah.
You wanna plug into your
Let's do it.
compare it to coaching, because it's a little bit less resource intensive.
W-
But it's really, it's like, how do we move that self-reflection
Yeah.
thing that we're doing that's not working into it, something that actually affects change?
I totally agree. And then to Marcus's point, how can we couple it with information about their performance?
Yeah.
So like we're trying, if we can get people to analyze these transcripts really quickly, then I would love to be able to give them a bunch of metrics, like how much time did you talk? How many words did you use? Like what, and they can do, the machine can do these sentiment analyses too, like how warm did you sound? And give them this information to see if more information and more structured reflection could leverage improvement more.
So it seems like, you're trying to broaden this out of institutions. Like, seems that maybe either more costly or less costly, I don't know. But like one of the questions could be like, does having simulations help? Like, is it helpful, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you can definitely imagine within an institution, you can randomly assign people access to having not just like feedback within this mechanism, right? But like this is part of like what colleges do. And see if you again have to look at like later outcomes for them. I think it would be helpful in many ways.
That's 100% what I wanted to get to like 3 years ago, but UVA would not allow me to give half of our candidates like a sexy, fun new technology and half of them not. So
Can be randomly assigned across partners.
Correct. So, but it would have to be a lot of partners to be sufficiently powered, and like we're not there yet. It's also like we have this promising evidence, so then to say like half of you won't get it is hard. But we're thinking, we're talking to Teach for America. They're the most open to doing something like that. But we're trying to figure out how to answer the question. That I want to answer that question. So that's So that's Vivian, my colleague, is really interested in switching replications. So that would be a way to do it, right? It would be to like have people get it at a point and then measure it, and then have the other half get it and then measure it. It's logistically hard, but we want to get there. That's what we want to know.
My question is, it was interesting for me to see you present the second study, because the first one you can imagine that many teacher educators would have this knee-jerk reaction to focusing on, not only focusing on classroom management, but also you can imagine the simulation looking and feeling like a video game or an exercise and making the bell go away.
Yeah.
Making that, like, doing it until you can make the thing shut up.
Right.
And that's kind of premise. But what I like about the second one is it is engaging in content, right?
Yeah.
And that seems to loop in a different audience.
Yeah.
I'm curious, so you said you presented this to a lot of policy audience.
Yes.
Can you speak to the range of reactions you've gotten from teacher educators?
Sure. It's loaded. I think people have complicated feelings about this that I respect. I think a lot of teacher educators, the first thing is it feels like micro teaching. It feels like technical. Personally, my position is that there are techniques that are embedded in the professional work of teaching That is my stance, but I know that other people don't agree with me. That's the biggest pushback. The second is that it's dehumanizing teaching, that it's having people interact with avatars rather than real children. And the point I try to make is it's not rather than, it's in addition to. And that's hugely important. I would never say we should have a suite of practice experiences that are simulations alone, ever. I think it's better to practice things for the first time on an avatar than a child. As a parent with 3 young children, I feel very confident in that. I don't want people practicing things on my kids. So I feel okay about that, but that is the other pushback. These are bite-sized moments. And I think a lot of teacher educators want to go macro, and I can't speak, teacher education is a variegated field, but like, I think a lot of people want to go to the big picture first. And I think my theory of learning is different. Like, I think there's utility in focusing on smaller things and recomposing them into something bigger over time. And I think if you just decompose, it's not good, but I think decomposition in service of ultimately recomposing, I think we know in other professions that is helpful, and we don't do particularly much of it in teacher education.
Yes, this is more of a logistics question. I'm thinking about this not being but practice. And you said there's some institutions that are doing this, not collecting data on this.
Yeah.
How do you see this in the logistics of method courses of you have in your study, you had them doing simulations in individual types of study.
That's right.
And you said like pretty quick turnover.
Mm-hmm.
You gotta be fast at bringing it over. To me, it seems like it would actually take a long time. I'm a methods instructor, and I have to make 20 or 25 separate simulations going. Like, do you see, when not collecting data, do you see any benefit to having kind of multiple research teachers in the space and having them kind of go back and forth?
Totally. So I use this in my course that way. Like, I do it in my whole class. I do all 30 people together, and sometimes they go up and teach, they co-teach. They feel more comfortable doing that. We play around, they script out, responses together, and then they try it. Then we give, and they do the coaching. I have them do the coaching, but that's much more, it's like a pedagogy in the class. And I have seen it anecdotally to be helpful, but we're not studying that systematically.
I'm wondering, where these simulations occurred in the context of, are they, in terms of like when they're doing their student teaching, are they
Yeah.
in the field at any point?
So they're in the field the whole time in our program, but they have 2 shorter practica. Like, the first one is they're in placements 3 hours a week. The second one, they're in placements 6 hours a week. And then the third one is the student teaching, where they're there for the full day, every day. We're in the middle of revising our program, so this will all change. We have simulations throughout, like concurrent with all of those experiences. I am interested in trying to, and our secondary program moved to a residency model in the middle of all this. So I'm actually trying to understand, like, not causally, but do we see differences descriptively in how our secondary candidates responded when they were in more traditional kind of model and in a residency model? We're early in that analysis, but it looks like they did. They like it better before it was a residency. And you can understand why that would be, right? This has more utility when you're not in a classroom all day, every day. So, so that's why I've been talking with Teach for America, and I'm excited about that, because I think that kind of like really intensive summer institute maybe is the best kind of place to do this kind of work, where it might feel the most useful. But it's an empirical question.
And are they the specific skills that you're focused on? Are they then trying those specific skills
Yes,
in the classroom?
that's right.
Have you monitored?
Well, so we have their videos that are going to be coded on the class, which is a very, widely used classroom observation tool. And they have a feedback. We picked these practices because they're aligned to the class. So they have a lot of behavior management scales, but they have a productivity scale, which is most closely aligned to our management scenario, and they have a feedback scale. So I focused, that's our language of practices, the class. So I tried to take more like kind of granular practices that were embedded in the class to focus on. Did you have a question? Okay.
Are you, sorry, are you seeing any, are there limitations?
Yeah, but we should wait till the video goes off. Sure. Yeah, there are limitations to anything. There are lots of limitations, and they're very open. I find them to be great partners, and they're very open to hearing what I see as limitations. They ask us all the time, like, what could we do better? But yes, there are limitations, but I also think there are limitations to our clinical placements. So.
Well, thank you, Julie. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out in the snow, everyone. Send me good thoughts for getting home to Virginia. Oh my goodness. Okay, so there's a color theme there, right? Blue and purple. Am I getting a blue and purple?
Stop. How do we stop it? Oh, wait.
Cornfish. So she's a Hannah got an animal process. Hannah, did you see that? I'm like, you should.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks.